I regard consciousness as fundamental. I regard matter as derivative from consciousness. We cannot get behind consciousness. Everything that we discuss, everything that we regard as real, postulates consciousness. Max Planck. Over the course of the extensive philosophical journey that is this channel, one absolutely central and recurrent motif has been a fundamental polarity, which we have described as that of noesis and concretion, ideational and corporeal activity, the implicate and explicate orders of reality, conceptual and physical prehension, formative and efficient causality. The noetic realm, or pleroma, is a world of morphogenetic fields comprised of indeterminate, formative consciousness of potentialities as such, distributions of possibility which are navigated by the organic processes which constitute the living world. The pleroma can be understood as a world of complex forms which are related to one another so as to form composite images, nebulous distributions of possible interactions, which are drawn into the flow of becoming so as to participate within the ever-ongoing cosmogenesis which is the natural world. These fields of noesis are composite images, in the sense that they are shaped by the innumerable events which have already occurred in the past. Each moment of animacy tunes into the vast array of past actualities with which it co-participates in a common, formative composition. No droplet of experience is isolated, but rather is informed by a cosmic memory, which we could call the Akasha, the body of the world, which is the consequent activity of creative becoming. There are two basic categories of existence: noetic fields and the concrete events which are generated through the dynamic interrelating of such fields to one another. Once these corporeal events occur, their actualization is then incorporated into the living body of the cosmos, where they become the raw materials through which we continue to generate reality. The pleroma, or noetic order, is a realm of unity, within which all things are always necessarily interwoven and enfolded with one another. The Akasha, or corporeal order, is a realm of separation, within which the noemata of the pleroma are holographically projected outward and thus unfolded so as to become the world of sensorial, geometric space. Although the formative, compositional structures of the pleroma are enfolded and interwoven with one another such that they are not separated by divisions of geometrical distance, the pleroma is nonetheless organized in such a manner that it is much more than a mere homogeneous soup. Whereas the corporeal is separated on the basis of physical proximity or distance, the noetic realm is organized instead on the basis of formative proximity. The noetic pole of an organic process will be informed by the noetic poles of processes which have already occurred in the past through a kind of resonance. This resonance occurs on the basis of how much formative similarity there is between the ongoing process and processes within the past. The noemata of the past will have greater influence within the ongoing process if those past noemata are of closer proximity to the ongoing process within morphogenetic space, rather than physical space. Just as two strings will exhibit sympathetic resonance on the basis of the overtones shared between them, the noetic poles likewise resonate with one another on the basis of such compositional similarity. In previous videos, we have illustrated this dynamic through the phenomenon of organic memory. Living processes such as biological organisms do not store memories by encoding information about past events within the physical medium of nervous systems or brains. Organic memories are contained within the past, and biological nervous systems should instead be regarded as more akin to radio receivers, which tune into past events rather than as books or computer hard drives within which memories are inscribed. The past events which an organism resonates with most strongly will be its own past activities, its own corporeal body. When we look to our physical bodies, what we are seeing is a complex of past events which we inherit from our own past activities. Our skin is the inheritance of cell divisions which have already occurred. Scars are the memories of past injuries. The body as a whole is a manifestation of a living form which has been sculpted through biological and even pre-biological processes which have unfolded over the course of evolutionary, geological, and cosmic history. The function of biological nervous systems and brains, therefore, is in organizing the influences of one's own past experiences, such that their influences upon the present can be conditioned in more purposive, selective ways. Certain memories can be prioritized in relation to others. Painful memories are conditioned such that they result in aversion rather than attraction when they are recalled. One's neurophysiological structures can also allow one to tune into very specific events which can be clearly delineated from others. If you stop at a random gas station on your way to work every day, then it's probably going to be very difficult for you to recall exactly which gas station you stopped at last Tuesday. The memories of such events are also similar to one another, that you lack any specific details which might allow the specific memory of what you did last Tuesday to be recalled independently of other such memories. The memories all seem to blur together, unless you are able to find a specific, unique detail which can allow you to orient yourself within this fog. If something particularly unusual happened last Tuesday, then you can use this detail as a germ from which the other details of the event might then come to grow. Habits, similarly, are established by repetition. Compositional elements which have occurred more frequently than others will generally have a much stronger influence in the shaping of subsequent processes. We can see this very clearly in general learning behaviors throughout all forms of biological life. A single action on its own may have very little influence, but repeated actions allow the organism's noetic pull to extract a general formative element from the composite structure of past events. Repetition thus allows an organism to discern the essence of a given activity, and such discernment is the essence of wisdom. With this understanding of memory, we can now begin to look at collective memory, and specifically the manner in which ritualistic and spiritualistic practices are oriented towards these dynamics of resonance and recollection. Ritualistic behaviors are, of course, repetitive, and such repetition can thus come to form specific modalities of consciousness which can be shared between human beings. When we engage in ritual behaviors, our consciousness is brought into closer noetic proximity to the past enactments of such rituals. Our own noetic poles are thus brought into closer contact with the mode of consciousness affiliated with the ritual, and with other individuals who have participated in such a mode of consciousness. Ritual behaviors also serve to disconnect noetic consciousness from its fixation upon the immediate physical environment. Our consciousness is always oriented towards that which is experienced as most relevant. Throughout daily life, the features of our experience which tend to be most relevant are our immediate physical environments and the navigation of those physical environments by our corporeal bodies. Within ritualistic behaviors, we are able to go through certain motions in a purely habitual manner. Our consciousness need not attend to the specific nuances of our physical activity, as this activity can be performed in a purely unconscious way. As such, our awareness is therefore freed to direct itself instead towards the noetic realm, towards the formative patterns within the akasha and pleroma, which our consciousness becomes interwoven with through resonance. Just as ritualistic practices are intended to facilitate our orientation towards the noetic realm, so too are sacred spaces. Sacred locations are identified as those which serve as conduits between the mundane and the transcendent, and sacred architectures are intentionally designed so as to perform such mediation. When we look upon a work of sacred art, our experience of the sacred image serves as a noetic germ within our minds. In much the same manner that a certain detail of an event might serve as a germ from which a complete memory of that event might come to unfold, the sacred icon is likewise able to serve as a germ from which a particular mode of spiritual awareness may come to realize itself within our consciousness. As we meditate upon the sacred image and its significations, we can begin to resonate with past events in which ourselves or others have engaged in similar practices. The composite image that is our noetic awareness comes to shift and reconfigure itself as it comes to be more thoroughly informed by the forms of noesis which are most consistently associated with the sacred image. The rising, vaulted ceilings of temples instill feelings of being subsumed within a transcendental realm which far exceeds the minute concerns and anxieties of our seemingly mundane existence. Reverent silence and sacred music both serve to ensure that a person's awareness is oriented upwards, away from the incessant cacophonous chatter of the profane. When we engage in the rituals of a specific sacred space and allow our awareness to be inundated by the significations of that space, we can bring ourselves into dialogue with something which far exceeds the bounds of that particular location. The mode of consciousness conditioned by a Catholic Church, for example, can bring us into dialogue with the entirety of Catholicism itself. Catholicism as a living body of practices, symbols, individual human lives, and the lives of populations spread throughout the world and throughout many centuries of history. Just as Catholicism or any other religion is a living body, it is likewise a realm within the pleroma, a diverse landscape comprised of many spaces of noetic consciousness, which are woven together so as to form a cohesive, organic unity. A given sacred space can connect us with landscapes of consciousness which far exceed the bounds of the physical environment, and it also connects us to the living memory of the specific physical space itself. We tend to think of physicality in direct opposition to that which is spectral or ghostly, but in truth, physicality itself is simply the most immediately apparent surface of a fundamentally apparitional akasha. There is no such thing as mere physicality. Physicality itself is the architecture of memory, which is sung into being by the choirs of the noetic realm. Populating this noetic realm, we find, of course, the noetic pulls of biological organisms, but we also find beings whose activity in the world is not fixated upon the activities of a specific biological body. Certain constellations of archetypal forms may come to be generated, which are able to instantiate themselves within the minds or bodies of living organisms, culture forms, ideological currents, and even within the seemingly materialistic processes of electromagnetism, chemistry, or astrophysics. Our world is constituted by phantoms, eidolons, archons, and aeons, just as much as it is comprised of biological bodies. To illustrate this, I want us to look first at a somewhat morbid example, the phenomenon of serial killers. Although violence has certainly been a part of human existence throughout the entirety of human history and even prehistory, the archetype of the serial killer represents a strikingly specific constellation of motifs which only came to assume their recognizable form over the course of the 19th and 20th centuries. A serial killer is almost always a male in his late 20s or 30s who is motivated by a psychological fixation within which sexuality and violence have come to be pathologically intermixed. These individuals tend to have been shaped by a history of childhood trauma, including sexual and domestic abuse, and such individuals often exhibit certain sadistic tendencies as teenagers or even as children, their later crimes being foreshadowed by the abuse of animals or other children. Although we do find a scattering of examples throughout history prior to the 19th century, which exhibit some of these common motifs, the serial killer archetype seems to have truly come to coalesce in the aftermath of the Industrial Revolution. The case of Jack the Ripper is perhaps one of the earliest and most highly publicized examples of the modern serial killer archetype. Although the perpetrator of these crimes was never identified, the case nevertheless clearly indicates many of the core motifs which would come to be exhibited by later instances, most notably the psychosexually motivated dismemberment of victims' bodies. Certainly one major factor at work in the growth and development of the serial killer phenomenon was the manner in which the very archetype of the serial killer came to be mythologized within our collective imagination. Serial killers came to be romanticized as well as vilified within magazines, novels, films, and television. This idealization of the archetype itself would then directly contribute to shaping manifestations of serial killer activity, as many serial killers would look directly to those famous serial killers in order to develop their own pathological fantasies, as well as the strategies they would employ in enacting such crimes. Independently of individual serial killers themselves, the archetype of the serial killer came to be a sort of autonomous complex, one which came to take on a life of its own in a quite literal sense, and which could come to instantiate itself within the minds and lives of individuals who were vulnerable to such pathological complexes due to their own internal discordance. The phenomenon of the serial killer is not simply a pattern, it is an archon, one which came to form through the psychosexual discordance which came to emerge through the development of the modern age. But beyond the more obvious influences of media depictions, we can also see here the influence of resonance in a more spiritualistic sense. When an individual begins entertaining fantasies of violence or enacting abuse towards animals at a young age, one is orienting oneself in relation to the noetic composite image, which consists of similar enactments perpetrated by those who came to walk a similar path. The individual is planting the seeds which might then come to resonate with the processes which came to develop within the minds and actions of other serial killers, and thus creating the conditions through which this archon might come to fully germinate and enrapture the human psyche. Individual serial killers are thus enactments of an archetypal complex, an archon which transcends any and all individuals within whom the archon might come to manifest itself. It is a locus of collective memory, one which has been sculpted through the fundamental commonalities which link these individuals and their actions to one another within noetic, morphogenetic space. The human mind and body are receivers, and even our most seemingly mundane thoughts and actions condition which frequencies, which noetic spiritual forces we might be tuning ourselves into. The archetype of the serial killer is, of course, a very modern permutation of the very ancient phenomenon of human violence. And undoubtedly, there are innumerable such autonomous noetic complexes which embody patterns of sadistic, masochistic, narcissistic, or otherwise immensely pathological tendencies. archonic beings which are driven predominantly by resentment, rage, and the madness which is the rejection of otherness, the disavowal of reality itself. Nonetheless, our world is much more thoroughly shaped by beings which are able to affirm both self and other, and which therefore accord with the affirmation of being itself, which is the beating heart of the cosmos at large. The neo-Darwinian paradigm of biology understands the essence of life as selfish replicators, which strive only to further their own existence through the blind, relentless imperative to survive and dominate. In reality, however, we find that actual organisms are driven by a much more nuanced will to existence, which conditions not only selfishness and violence, but also symbiosis, self-sacrifice, cooperation, and even the simple enjoyment of the world, which need not defer to any utilitarian motivations. We find that biological organisms behave in this way not because of some complex game theory by which purely selfish motivations can deceptively appear to be altruistic, but rather because the forces within the noetic realm which act to shape and direct biological life are oriented by a will to existence which transcends the purely selfish, neo-Darwinian will to self-perpetuation. Habits of symbiotic cooperation can win out against habits of pathological violence because the former are better able to further the project of life itself, irrespective of the reproductive fitness of DNA sequences. Just as the human body is in many ways a composite formed of memories, so too are the ecological systems of the biomes we find within the natural world. Just as the pillars and icons of a sacred temple can serve as anchors for complexes of specific memories and the teleological forces associated with them, so too can trees, lakes, rivers, and soil serve as conduits through which the past reenacts itself through the continual generation and regeneration of biological life. If the activities of religious participation or even violent criminals can amalgamate into autonomous complexes of formative power, then might the memories of a given geographic location likewise come to coalesce into distinct personalities within the noetic realm. Throughout every single human culture form throughout the world, we find some variation of the nature spirit. Fae folk, kami, nymphs, jinn, dryads, sasquatch, gnomes, elves, uthras, deva. Many of these terms refer to a range of beings, not all of which can necessarily be classified as nature spirits, but each of these terms encompass, in some way or another, beings which do correspond to the nature spirit archetype. Looking to the myths and folklore surrounding such entities, we find a range of common themes. These are beings which often blend anthropomorphic and animalistic features, both in terms of their behavior and physiological appearance. They often appear when a person is alone, in a highly remote location, or both, and such beings seem to have a propensity towards appearing before women and children more so than adult males. Such entities also tend to exhibit many features which are associated with the archetype of the trickster spirit. They often appear to toy with human beings or even intentionally lead them astray into the deeper wilderness. And upon occasion, they can even appear to be overtly hostile or malevolent. In either case, the function which these entities tend to perform is quite consistent. Their appearance represents a jarring encounter for human beings who experience the boundaries of mundane normalcy to be abruptly and strikingly ruptured. As we've examined in previous videos, there is an essential connection between the trickster archetype and the process of boundary dissolution, particularly with regards to the breakdown of solidified assumptions and habits within the human psyche. What this might then suggest is that nature spirits tend to manifest in a manner which is directly shaped by the demands of the unconscious human psyche. As the human psyche matures within the confines of mundane civilization, its assumptions about the world tend to solidify in relation to that sense of normalcy. We live out our ordinary lives in a civilized world, within which the extraordinary, unpredictable, and primal aspects of the world have been purged by the human demand for stability and predictability. We therefore often come to unthinkingly presume that the mundane is all there is to the world, and our sense of imaginative power and wonder come to atrophy through neglect. Our imaginative awareness is lulled into a complacent slumber by the routine vulgarity of civilization, and that aspect of our being comes to lie dormant until the boundaries of everyday expectation are broken down by the traumatic or the otherworldly. When we encounter beings such as Fae, Sasquatch, Jinn, or cryptids of whatever variety, we are encountering the noetic, formative personalities of natural biomes. We encounter such eidolons as trickster spirits, because the trickster archetype is the function which our own unconscious minds need these beings to perform. Our own unconscious minds feel the need for the reawakening of our own imaginative faculties, and we thus perceive these beings in a manner which accords with the boundary-disrupting activity of the trickster. Through this disruption, the boundaries formed by the human ego come to be permeated in such a manner that our imaginative consciousness is able to reawaken. The illusion that the world is constituted solely by that which is comprehensible to mundane, materialistic consciousness comes to be lifted, and our sense of connection to the infinite comes to be liberated. For the human psyche, these nature spirits serve the exact same purpose, which is served by all other entities, and indeed all other human beings which we encounter throughout our lives. They are mirrors. In one of our most recent videos, we looked at how we might understand the phenomenon of time dilation in a post-Einsteinian manner, by considering time dilation as the real expansion of the experiential processes which constitute physical matter, rather than as a perspectival measurement distortion. In doing so, we also examine the phenomenon of spiritual experiences among astronauts, and how this reconceptualization of time dilation might allow us to better understand the significance of this pattern. Rather than understanding time in an Einsteinian sense, as a stubbornly persistent illusion, we instead can understand time in the manner suggested by Henri Bergson and Alfred North Whitehead. Time as the concretization of felt possibilities into determinate decisions through the activity of living, animate processes. Time as a formation of the corporeal through the activity of the noetic. Within an Einsteinian framework, duration itself is understood to be no more than an illusion. The amount of time taken by a process to occur is strictly determined by one's frame of reference. There is no absolute time, no absolute simultaneity, and thus no objective reality with regards to how long durations actually are. According to this Einsteinian framework, there is no objectively real time at all, as all perception of time is a kind of hallucination, which results from our limited perspectives on reality. Within a noetic framework, however, we can understand time in a manner which is much more consistent with the reality of time as it is actually encountered empirically within human experience. Time consists of the activity of living systems, which are constantly incorporating into their formation both memory as well as the felt potentialities of possible futures. When a process is more thoroughly habitual, these influences of the distant past or possible futures come to be overshadowed by the more mechanical, unconscious unfolding of physical repetitions. Looking to our own experience, we can see that our consciousness is much less present for such habitual processes, and the flow of time is experienced as less interrupted. Durations are experienced as more rapid, more contracted. Alternatively, the more present our consciousness is in the activity of a given process, the more dilated our field of awareness becomes in relation to the past and future. Our consciousness becomes far more active in the incorporation of factors which transcend the immediacy of our physical environments. We are no longer simply acting and reacting, and as such, our consciousness and our experience of duration comes to be dilated. Time itself is felt to expand. We can thus understand the activity of consciousness as a kind of forestalling of time, which lengthens durations through its involvement. On the surface of the Earth, the processes of the atoms and molecules which constitute our bodies are conditioned by the gravitational field or mass field of the Earth, such that they proceed in a more or less uniform manner. The lowest level processes which make up our physiological bodies proceed in a manner that is mostly irrespective of our conscious experience, thus constituting a kind of self-consistent temporal foundation. For objects moving at extreme velocities high above the Earth's surface, however, processes become untethered from the contractive, normalizing influence of the Earth's mass field. The consciousness of these processes comes to dilate, and as such, so does time itself. The spiritual experiences of astronauts seem to indicate such a dilation of consciousness. Astronauts such as Edgar Mitchell, Barry Wilmore, James Irwin, Gene Cernan, and others underwent intensely spiritual experiences while in orbit, and their accounts of these experiences share numerous common motifs: experiences of oneness, transcendence, and divine purpose. This phenomenon has been consistent enough that it has been named the overview effect, a term which indicates that these experiences are ultimately no more than a bizarre side effect of seeing the Earth from an unusual vantage point. But here we can begin to see that the implications of these experiences may be much more profound. If becoming untethered from the Earth's mass field is able to directly accentuate human receptivity to noetic experiences, then this might then imply that electromagnetic phenomena down on Earth might correlate with supraordinary phenomena in much the same manner. As we have seen previously, gravitational, magnetic, and electrical phenomena are all in fact different activities of noetic fields, and as such we should expect there to be many relationships between the electromagnetic and the supranormal. As early as the late 19th century, psychologists and physicists had begun to theorize that there may be relationships between spiritualistic and electromagnetic phenomena. Some suggested that electromagnetic processes might allow scientists to account for poltergeist activities or spiritual experiences in a purely materialistic way. Yet many others saw this connection as a potential bridge between physical science and the world of consciousness itself. During the 1980s, the psychologist and parapsychologist Michael Persinger developed a device now infamously known as the God helmet. If you are familiar with this God helmet, then it is probably because this device was often used by self-proclaimed skeptics to argue that all supranormal experiences are in fact nothing more than brain malfunctions. But in reality, Michael Persinger's intention was not to discredit or explain away supranormal experiences, but rather to demonstrate the connection between such experiences and electromagnetic phenomena. The God helmet device operates by producing extremely weak magnetic fields which are fluctuated in accordance with patterns which are intended to mimic patterns seen within the human limbic system. After wearing the helmet for a period of time, the helmet tends to induce experiences which resemble spiritual or paranormal experiences to a degree. Subjects often report the sensing of otherworldly presences, which subjects typically identify as angelic beings or even deceased loved ones. But Persinger's experiments with the God helmet were intended to replicate effects which Persinger believed to occur naturally due to the influence of geomagnetic phenomena upon the human mind. Persinger and other theorists of parapsychological phenomena have suggested that certain geographic locations might be more conducive to anomalous experiences due to the relationship between such locations and the activity of the Earth's magnetic field. Similar research has pursued the connection between seismic activity and anomalous phenomena. Earthquake lights are unexplained luminous phenomena which occur in relation to excessive seismic activity, and which are often associated with spiritual or mythological beings within folklore. Certain geographic regions are particularly prone to similar luminous phenomena, such as the Hessdalen lights of Norway or the Naga fireballs of the Mekong River in Southeast Asia. Persinger's research regarding such connections indicated that there was a negative correlation between geomagnetic activity and anomalous experiences, and also a positive correlation between seismic activity and such experiences. This led Persinger to develop models which were intended to predict temporal variations in UFO sighting reports, and Persinger's models proved to be quite accurate, predicting some 80% of the overall variation in UFO sightings. What this all might indicate then is that certain geographic locations and even specific times of year might be particularly conducive for supraordinary experiences. In 2019, the geologist Rualdo Minigat presented findings at the Geological Society of America which indicated that Incan holy sites had been deliberately constructed upon tectonic fault lines. Similarly, we also find that many temples of ancient Greece, such as the Temple of Delphi, were likewise constructed upon such fault lines. The phenomenon of ghostly lights is a common motif found throughout various forms of anomalous experiences. As previously mentioned, these lights tend to accompany seismic activities that are recurrent in specific locations. Very similar orbs are often associated with paranormal or parapsychological events, and accounts of fey-lights or will-o-wisps can be found throughout the folklores of various cultures. Within more scientific contexts, the poorly understood phenomenon of ball lightning has been suggested as a possible explanation for various forms of anomalous experiences. If the phenomenon of ball lightning is to be taken as a general indication, we can infer that anomalous lights in general may in fact be some form of plasma phenomenon. Plasmas are, of course, electromagnetic phenomena. More specifically, they are formations within which the electronic shells of gaseous substances come to merge with one another such that the substance comes to form an organic whole, much in the same way that the electronic shells of solid metals come to merge. Given that these electrostatic fields are noetic fields, this may then imply that certain forms of noetic agency might come to act through ball lightning or other such plasma phenomena. Eidolons, archons, or phantoms which reside within the noetic pleroma will in general be limited to acting upon the physical world through their manifestation within the minds of biological organisms such as human beings. Plasmas and other such electromagnetic phenomena, however, may be a significant exception to this. It may be the case that noetic entities are able to use electromagnetism to interact with the corporeal world in a much more direct manner than might otherwise be the case, and ball lightning may be the most common or apparent example of such behaviors. In considering electromagnetism as a bridge between the physical and noetic domains of reality, we must also consider the role which modern technologies might be performing in altering the relationship between human consciousness and the noetic realm at large. Our world is now inundated by an incessant and almost omnipresent cacophony of electromagnetic radio signals through which our telecommunications technologies operate. Electrical energy is the lifeblood of modern civilization, and the tentacular currents of electricity which weave our world together are fountains of electromagnetic propagations. As previously mentioned, Michael Persinger's research suggested a negative correlation between geomagnetic activity and anomalous phenomena. Likewise, we can infer that there may be a correlation between the spiritual experiences of astronauts and their being more removed from the Earth's geomagnetic influences in orbit. These phenomena might then suggest that it is in fact the absence or quieting of electromagnetic influences which allows for the dilation of consciousness and thus the facilitation of noetic experiences. Given that we also seem to see a positive correlation between anomalous experiences, sacred spaces, and seismic activities, this may then indicate that seismic activities are in fact correlated with greater fluctuations of geomagnetism, and that within such fluctuations, the decreases in the strength of geomagnetic fields represents a kind of loosening of the contractive influence of the ether upon the human psyche, thus facilitating anomalous or holotropic modes of human consciousness. What this may then imply is that our current manner of implementing electromagnetic technologies may itself be directly truncating human consciousness so as to mitigate our capacity to expand our awareness beyond the confines of our immediate physical environments and mundane materialistic concerns. We've created a social environment within which the vacuity of electrostatic energy is contributing to a nihilistic vacuity of meaning, and the density of magnetism is contributing to a Saturnian rigidification of the human psyche. Throughout human history, caverns have often served as sacred spaces of meditation and sacrament. The seclusion of the cavern allows for refuge from the mundane world. The darkness of the cavern signifies the womb-like darkness of the archaic structure of consciousness, the pre-egoic, abyssal oneness from which the human sense of selfhood came to emerge and to which human beings have continually returned in order to drink from the wellspring of primordial awareness. Along with the magical nature of darkness and stillness, the natural acoustic properties of caverns further serve to accentuate the auditory, vibrational nature of the magical, etheric structure of our consciousness. Such spaces allow for a re-attunement towards the vital energies of life, death, regeneration, and the immanence of the natural world which we are interwoven with. Within modern civilization, we find precious little repose from the incessant hum and grinding of the mechanistic age, to such an extent that stillness, silence, and darkness have themselves come to be experienced as an alien, malevolent presence. In order to reawaken the dormant aspects of our own consciousness, and thus our connection to the world itself, we must find ways to cut through the tangled maelstroms of modernity. We must find ways to create clearings of stillness, receptivity, and resonance, within which we might rediscover the diaphaneity of the natural world. Thanks for watching.